Good day, lovely people, and happy Women's History Month. Yes, it's the second for those of you who are watching us live. We are moving right along. For those of us Black women, we just double dipping, moving from Black history to women's history. So I'm here for all of it. We hope you all are doing well. It just happens to be that as we continue our journey, rotating through our success spheres and categories, we happen to be pulling into the professional well-being sphere this week. So, Lane, kick us off as you always do.
Yeah, so today we're talking about the career game. And right before this, we had a whole conversation about, where we can go with this conversation, because this is something that is widely discussed at this point, is the discrepancies of women and men in the workplace. And, we talk a lot about sexism, and that's a very, very real and an extremely challenging issue that women face in some industries more than others, in some organizations more than others, but it's everywhere. We see it outside of the workplace. We see it in the workplace. Today we're talking about how some of the things behind and more hidden in the workplace, and some of the historical and, societal forces around the way that women show up to life have impacted us and negatively in our experience of, quote, climbing the career ladder or just succeeding in career. And so just to kind of start this off, this is not really what I planned to say first, but after our conversation before this, just with us getting ready for it, I just wanted to start it off with some more of a just kind of like historical, I guess, like experience of why some of this has become what it is. And so I had been doing some reading about this, and for a long time women were not welcome in the workforce at all. And so what got us in the door initially, and I'm talking, before you and I were like, or even thoughts women were able to get into the workforce simply by their degree or their certification or their license. So it was kind of like, you as a woman, you were so reliant on having that piece of paper, or that, you had to overcompensate. You had to overprove yourself. So you had to make sure that you had all the things lined up. You had to have your degrees, your certifications, whatever it was, to make it in the workforce. And that was a legitimate thing for a very long time. It still is. But the point is that it has actually like created this thing for women of this like almost over emphasis on, or like overestimating the importance of some of these things, so that we underestimate the importance of other aspects of making it in the career game. So things such as, networking and knowing people and advocating for yourself. So we've all heard the statistic that women, apply for only 60% of jobs that they're not qualified for, and men apply for 100% of jobs they're not qualified for. I don't quite understand how that statistic was gained, or exactly. I looked it up on multiple different places just to find out how I could even like say it correctly, but it doesn't quite really make sense to me the way that's like that statistic has been shared. But the point being that women, we are socialized to be rule followers. We're socialized, from a very young age that.
Well, hold on. Let me just add to that to just clarify. So I think what that study is referencing is we apply only when we essentially feel like we know that we're qualified. Whereas men will apply for a job when they like can clearly know to themselves, I don't think I'm actually qualified for this, but I'm going to apply anyway. That's the essence of the percentages, right? Is that
exactly. That's behind.
They're down to apply when they are sure that they don't qualify, whereas we absolutely are just not going to do that. Generally.
Yes. And thank you for clarifying that. I think, many of you have probably heard of this statistic or heard something like this. And if you haven't, then it's great for you to hear it now, because it's an important thing. And we're talking about that today, and that kind of like the whys behind that primarily. So really what I was just getting at, and then I want to hear your thoughts, Liz, is just that, when we think about a statistic like that, it comes down to, a lot of people ask why, and a lot of people might say that women are just less confident. But our point in this conversation is not that women are less confident in themselves and that they can do the job, because there are other statistics out there saying that that's not why they didn't
Mhm.
apply for the job. It's not because they felt like they couldn't do the job well. It was sometimes it was that they felt like they wouldn't get hired because they didn't meet all the qualifications. But, many of the times it's just, yeah, that they didn't think that's how it worked, that like they didn't meet these qualifications. So, all right, well, why even apply, because I'm not going to get the job. So it's about, the rules behind the hiring process, and maybe not quite understanding that there are more things that go into hiring, and make more things that go into, climbing a career ladder, than just having these like specific pieces of paper, or these like certifications, or these, the receipts of your experience kind of thing. And that's what I was getting at with there's actually a reason that a lot of us feel like these qualifications are so important, because for so long, actually, that is how we got jobs. We had to have that. And no matter how many people we knew, or how well we advocated for ourselves, there was true barriers of sexism that were different than they are now, and that it was actually required for us to meet these qualifications. So now that that's not the case as much, and now that we're moving into a new era of, feminism, and a new era of the workplace and gender equality, like, we have to figure out how to play the game differently, because it's not working how it used to. And I think, or we've never learned how to play the game, is really the point. So, Liz, what are your thoughts on all this? I know you have many.
Yeah, I have lots of them. We'll see if they all find their way to this microphone. But yeah, so this was a topic that I brought to you, Lane, that I wanted to cover. And first of all, let me be clear. Today's conversation is not just about getting hired. Our conversation is more broadly about women, and I wouldn't even say just in the workplace. I would say women and career success, because that to me is the more broad topic. And I would argue that everything that we discuss not only would probably apply to career, but it applies in other ways. And for me personally, I this has been something that has come on my radar more and more as I've elevated in my levels of success. And I will say that I'm going to focus on the gender component, as a woman today. But I would also just note that this also has doubly, triply, quadruply more significance for any woman of color, because research shows, and my experience shows, both as personal experience and professionally in consulting and the coaching work that I do, that we're not even thinking about game. Generally speaking, like, women aren't thinking about, even the word game has such a negative connotation. And to your point earlier, Lane, we are raised, it's way before, it's not like, this is before the part about how there was one point in which there was a certification or degree that would get you in the door. I'm going back to birth.
Yeah.
And up until today, in 2023, little girls are still being raised in a way that says we should be following rules. We're taught
Yeah,
about
definitely.
the critical importance of following rules. And I'm going to challenge all the moms, like, because, and if you all know me, I'm disrupting. I don't care who's on the other side of it. If we want to level up, everything I talk about is what can we own in that. So before we go into all the other deep stuff, we're not saying that sexism isn't a thing, and we're not saying there isn't issues that need to be addressed in policy, and we're not saying that that's not worth fighting for, or exploring, or continuing to address. However, as you all know, who listen to me either on this podcast, or my Disruptive Discourse podcast, or whenever I'm randomly running my mouth, I am always going to focus on what can I control, right? Because the advocacy component has its place, but it is not a solution. Because in case you hadn't thought about it, the likelihood that sexism is going to exist when you die is really high. Let's just be honest. And I'm not trying to Debbie Down it. I'm just keeping it real. So for me, I look at things and say, while I'm acknowledging that these are issues, and while certainly we should continue to make efforts to address things, right, the way we can, I'm going to meet it from the other side too and say, what can I be doing as a woman um, to expedite this outcome? Because I'm not, Dr. Elizabeth Joy is not willing to wait to see whether or not the powers that be are going to get their shit together as soon as I'd like them to, as it relates to any of these issues. So I'm always asking, how can I show up differently? What are the things that I can do? And I'm not, anything that I'm going to suggest or reference today, I'm not necessarily saying is that I'm excited that these are solutions that I consider or have actually implemented, but I am saying that at the end of the day, it's about how do we get there. And for me, again, me personally, if you all are willing to like hope and wait and you know, you have patience for that, I respect that. I just can say for me personally, I'm going to try to figure out the fastest way to get to the highest levels I want to get to. So all that being said, right? The conditioning component of us training our little girls, and again, we women are then, you know, and I don't identify as a feminist. I don't hate on feminists. I don't identify as that, just so we're clear. But we women, while we're out here advocating, are also raising our daughters in many cases to whether we, because we just don't realize, because it's so deep in how we're conditioned, right? That we should be following rules, and this is the right and wrong way to do things. And certain words like game or strategy or those kind of things can really make us feel some kind of way, let alone if you're a woman and you really are like big hearted and kind, which we generally tend to embrace that nurture type personality and spirit and energy in all we do as women, right? So you think about being raised, like, so we're raised to follow the rules, we're raised to believe that things will work out, and if we do the right thing, that's the way you get to where you're going. And to your point, Lane, in our sort of pre-discussion, we do really well in school, right? Because school does much more focus on rules, and it does measure us in a way that really speaks to those test outcomes, right? The actual measurable like outcomes of performance. But when you start getting into adulthood and then also the workplace, you're not even in the quote unquote game, you're not even on the field for you to then be able to show that you're performing better, or that your quote unquote test results would come out better. So there's really this issue of gender identity and the way in which we're raised and continue to be messaged towards in what we see in ads and movies and whatnot, that has us feeling like anything other than working our butts off, getting all the degrees and following the rules, if we do anything other than that, we're now a bad person. We're not that's not a feminine woman kind person thing to do. And meanwhile, there's a whole rule book called the 48 Laws of Power. If you've never heard of it, the first time I ever encountered it, I almost want to throw up. Like, it made my whole soul hurt, because it's there's some stuff in here that's just like, holy crap. But in case you all are not aware, like, this is a rule book that has been used in the workplace, which has been traditionally male and traditionally white male. And it really literally pulls from lessons from history from all over the world, related to war, right? Which war, right? Not I'm trying to get a job. I would like to get promoted from war, right? And these are rules. And if you pay attention to many folks' um, bookshelf, you'll see that they know what these rules are. Now, I have never gotten myself to the point where I can subscribe to these, because I just, there's just certain elements to this that I don't care what's at stake. I'm just not willing to go there. But the importance of knowing that these exist and that they are being used, whether you agree with them or not, is a critical component to being able to think about how you can elevate as a woman in your career and in the workplace. And again, our conditioning leads us to either A, be completely oblivious to this, or B, just be absolutely 100% in a state of refusal to do anything other than what we've been taught, or even re-explore how we define what it means to be ethical and moral and blah, blah, blah. Because this is not a podcast about hoping that we start a movement of women who embrace immoral and unethical behavior. But it is about being willing to re-explore and potentially tweak some things so that we can loosen some things up on our own behalf, because trust and believe your counterparts have no problem doing this. And this is some of the reason, and I'm not blaming us, but at the end of the day, like, you got to, if you're going to be in the game, because you are, if you're in a workplace, you're in the game, whether you've signed up in that with that in mind or not, you're in it. And so to be in a game and not know that there are rules, and then reconcile the difference between those rules and your beliefs and what you're willing to do and not willing to do, to me is just a situation where you're really not giving yourself all you deserve to have the tools you need, right, to level up. So I'll stop there, because I can go hard for a whole hour on this, Lane. I know we always represent different generational perspectives, and obviously we're two different humans. So love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, a lot of stuff going through my head. I think first and foremost, I've been, as you were talking, I think about the history of feminism, and I think about, it has struggled a lot with being intersectional. And so that is a huge problem. And within the world of feminism, and, you think about, the white feminist savior type people that, that's how feminism in a lot of ways has gotten a bad name. And I think, but what I wanted to kind of like bring to the table too, is that this truly, to me, this conversation is a very feminist conversation. And so when you say you don't identify as a feminist, I am curious, this conversation, feminism is really about disrupting. It's about disrupting the status quo, and like taking back power, like, which I think is really what you're referring to. So it's interesting to me to like just kind of like reframe a little bit about how we're talking about this. And I always love to reframe the way that people have misconceptions about the word feminism in the first place, and how we approach that as women. So that, to me, this is very feminist and very much about, empowering women to take back the power that they and create a more equal playing field, which again, the word playing field, again, everything kind of harkens back to what you were saying. But that's kind of where my mind went initially. I have some personal thoughts as well, just like about the way that I have been socialized, and how I've been, how I perceive these issues. And I think some of it is for sure generational. Some of it is, the privilege that I have as a white woman, for sure. Like, I've been thinking a lot as you were talking about how, I almost can see both sides so well. Like it's and some of that I think is
both sides of what?
Both sides of the playing the game and the rule following. And I think I straddle that line and have throughout my life. And I think part of what has opened my eyes so much over my lifetime to the privilege that I have as a white person is that when I did explore the playing the game kind of dynamic, it did work for me, so to speak, in the fact that I was, I guess, quote, like, rewarded for it in the way that, I was able to get jobs. I never let the qualifications thing stop me. I mean, I applied for a job in high school that I was not qualified for at all and got it. And just like totally advocated for myself in the interview. It was like, I know I can do this job. I know I'm not qualified. So, part of that is, me being privileged in many ways, and knowing that I also was raised by,
yeah, I was going to say, you came from a whole tree of disruptors. So, Lane,
exactly.
you're not quite normal in how you show up to this anyway.
Exactly. So that's why I'm like, I'm trying to kind of like weigh my own individual experience against, the general like kind of societal stuff that's going on, because I know that I do have these privileges, such as, you know, like I just described, and also having the people, the women who raise me, and that being sort of like drilled into my head, the whole like the dynamic of you can be a rule follower and you can be a disruptor kind of thing, where it's like I always felt like I was a rule follower all through school, and now even to an extent, I mean, my parents being lawyers, like I was always like told, you know, rules are so important, laws, whatever. But at the same time, like when it comes down to your career, you need to advocate for yourself and you need to break barrier kind of thing. So like that's how and that's how I hope to raise, if I have a daughter, how I hope to raise her. But so
let me ask you this though, Lane, because you're like, I think you're kind of zoomed in on the application part, because I know we talked a lot about that research, but as I was saying when we started, like this is so much bigger than that. So I'm thinking about conversations we've had and where I see your conditioning, because to me the bigger conversation here is about how women's the conditioning, the feminine female conditioning and the identity that starts to come with it becomes conditioning to almost essentially be behind, right? And or out of the game. You might be in the workplace, but you're not in the game, because you are literally lining up like and showing up in a way that fully aligns with your how you were raised from a feminine female perspective. So when I think about some of the conversations we've had about, and I coached you on some of your burnout issues, right, which we identified came from the way you have showed up historically as a person who's going to fix all things. You're a person who's gonna you quickly announce as soon as you start a job to everyone that you're here and you're willing to be helpful to them and let you know if they need anything. And then you end up in situations historically where your colleagues have continuously leveraged that to allow you to do the work and them to do way less work, and then you be the one burn out. I would argue that's the exact same scenario here, in where the conditioning in that case, you were unaware that your identity as a woman and the female conditioning that brings you the same exact stuff that makes you the good-hearted, amazing person who you are, which I love as a human and I love as a staff person, right? Is tied to some of the less favorable outcomes and realities you've lived in your career, which not as a blaming type angle, but which you help to facilitate and contribute to, because you were leaning into quote unquote feminine female conditioning type tendencies, right? And so that's why I wanted to zoom out from the whole like applying reality, because
you know
what, you could definitely be trailblazing in the application process, but how many women are sitting here doing way more work than men? And we could say, or men or anyone else, because this is not a male bashing thing. Everyone who knows me know I ride hard for the fellas too, but we are talking about women's issues today. But like you literally are in position to like, we can talk about all that's not there and all the problems, but like, if we be honest, like if we made some shifts while we're waiting on these fools to get it together as it relates to gender pay, equity, and all that type of stuff, we could make some tweaks in how we show up that we would get instant results. And I've seen you do that. So that being said, as I shifted to something I know you've struggled with, now what do you think?
No, that's actually, I'm really glad you brought that into it. You know what? I just had like an aha moment about like, again, this whole idea of the rule, like it's okay. So this idea that like once you get in the door, you're good, is how I think women are like, that's more how
and then you resume, and then you resume those submissive type tendencies,
the rule following. If I just check off all the boxes, well, now I'm in the door, and now I just have to do what I always did all through school, all through life, which is just do diligent work
really well,
kind of like put your head down and do the work. Follow all the rules, and then
you know, for working harder oftentimes than your male peers and getting paid less. Okay.
100%. Yeah. And yeah, and that was my experience. I mean, specifically, again, this is not male bashing, but a lot of the time in my experience, it was very gendered in the workplace. And so I feel like when you brought that to the table, it made me realize that, yeah, when you zoom out of just the application process, it does bring to light that maybe we can get in the door, because we can get in the door. I mean, if you look at a lot of
Oh yeah,
organizations
we're
now,
crushing
especially,
it out here.
we are.
Absolutely.
And then to bring up the statistic I said earlier before we got on when we were kind of like going through what we would talk about, and how women are actually 16% more likely to get hired once they do apply to the job, and actually 18% more likely if it's a senior level role. So it's not about we can't get the jobs. I mean, plenty of times there are statistics, about recruiters not opening as many profiles if it's a woman's profile, or not actually considering women as often. That is all we know, that's out there. We know that there
That's a
is
thing.
true
That's a thing.
sexism, yes, in the hiring
And that's
process.
not just by other men. Let's be clear. Women are
No,
looking at
women.
other women and thinking that, because that's the whole issue with racism, sexism, all that. Like, and this is why I don't identify with certain words that are tied to movements, because it starts having you go down lanes that doesn't allow you to see holistically what's going on here, right? It's like you're
Yeah.
missing a piece to this, right? Because so you're feminist, you're BLM, whatever you are, and so that doesn't allow you to show up with a mirror to ask yourself oftentimes, what's my part in this? How do I also display some of these same things I'm advocating against? So that's just why I stay away from all of that overall summary word concept kind of stuff, because it's so overloaded with it. It's almost like leading questions, where it starts like, we started this talking about applying, so as a result you're only thinking about that. So you see how you got to be
Yeah.
careful how you start a conversation, right?
Let me ask you. So, we're talking about women playing the game. So you're an example of a woman who has played the game, and you could say very successfully played the game. What are the specific challenges that a woman faces when they do play the game, that are not maybe being faced by men who are, quote, playing the same game? Because that's another thing, that women fear
Well,
certain
yeah.
consequences of being seen in.
Here's the thing. I don't even want to answer that, because
Okay.
I don't want to contribute to a conversation about how much harder it is for women versus men, because to me that's not really the point. You can go many to many podcasts and listen to that, because I can lay out to you very clearly how men have it harder than women in certain ways. And your classic feminist will try to come from me, but your classic feminist is not willing to show up and just look at the actual freaking facts, which is why I don't identify with certain words or identities like that, because they start to force you to stay within parameters and don't allow. I show up to everything evaluating from a full-blown humanity perspective, and how do we all hold ourselves accountable and others accountable without trying to categorize it and put it in the buckets? And again, I'm not knocking those who do it, but we surely don't need another conversation about how much harder it is for a woman to do this versus a man do that. I just don't. That's not to me what I was put on the world to contribute. Because again, everybody's doing that, and I don't knock it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But I think when it gets imbalanced, we start losing, to me, the focus. And my focus, again, if you're talking to Dr. Elizabeth Joy, I'm going to always bring you back to, but what can you do? Because part of the reason I've been successful is because I have refused to spend so much time focusing on all of the ways in which life is effing unfair for me as a double minority. I'm aware of them. I bring them up and advocate when I feel it's the right time for me to do it. But when it comes down to getting my results, because at the end of the day, you know me well, Lane, I care about results. And I can do theoretical conversations with the best of them, but I'm not really interested in a theoretical conversation. I am interested in results. And anybody I coach, anybody who I consult with, I'm not interested if you're not here for results, right? So for me, the whole let's talk about all the ways in which this is harder for a woman than a man, like that doesn't get us to the part about what can you do? What do you have in control, in your control, to get you better outcomes while we're waiting on the stuff that may never change? That's to me what's most important. So I don't, that for me, that's not a question to ask me because I don't really, that it's irrelevant to the point for me of, we already know there's plenty of folks who know this is the issue and they're doing work. And even for myself, I do show up and lean on situations and add my fuel to the fire in moments where it makes sense for me to advocate for women, to advocate for Black women, to advocate for whatever, right? But that's like not my lead lane. My lead lane is, and let's get to the results and let's prioritize doing what we can control, addressing what we can control. Because I just know how much, if you want to be a full-time advocate, like, then by all means. But if you're someone who's results oriented, like, and you want actual outcomes for yourself, you have a financial goal, you have a role goal, right, or whatever, then I would say you better balance how much time you spend talking about how hard it is and how unfair it is with actually figuring out the ways in which you can get there right now, even though we all agree this is some BS that we're still dealing with in 2023 about what the differences are for women versus men in the workplace. So that's my response to that. I just, for what? Right?
That's
You know what I mean?
fair. Yeah. And I know you don't show up to life or work in that mindset, which again, like if that's where you're at, then that's fine. But I also feel that, like, yeah, that's not where how you show up. I was just more interested, I guess, in also the like the game itself. Like how has that, how do you define that? And like what does
Yeah.
that look like for you?
Yeah, and let me be clear too. The first question, is it hard? Hell effing yeah, it's hard. And is it an exact science? No, it's not. And I would argue that no matter what, whether you choose to lean into some of my disruptive perspectives and shit, I would argue this shouldn't be seen as that damn disruptive at this point, right? But some of y'all might think that it is, and that's fine. But I would say no matter what, whether you're showing up in the classic, we'll call it, like, approach to workplace and career success, where you're fully committed to rule following, or you opt into to the version that I'm presenting today, it's still hard. It's still like you're literally, because even when you follow the rules, you're like, well, shit, I'm thinking of a mentee that I just talked to last week who is like, and she's younger, right? So it's not only she's female, African American, and she's younger. So she's trying to like really climb that ladder, be seen, get her opportunity, right? And so she's like, man, I'm grinding, but she's like, I'm starting to get to a point where I feel like I don't know if I can keep this up. Like, it's to the point, you know what I mean? So it's like, on one hand, like, there are times where a strategy of doing the classic thing where you work harder than everyone else and you volunteer yourself in certain ways may be a thing you need to do. And that's more on the classic side when we think about like a woman and how we tend to show up. Like, I would argue that's got like one of the original uncontested angles that you can take. And I don't think that's fully outdated. To me, that's why I'm very thoughtful about, this is not a one size fits all response. It's not a one size fits all, or this is always the solution every time. Because I'm not arguing that rule following, we shouldn't be following rules at all, or that you should just be aborting following, right? Because there are times, quite frankly, where we have an advantage over men, to the whole point here, where they weren't conditioned a certain way, right? And so that bites them in the butt when some shit hits the fan. And because they weren't conditioned to really respect rules all like that, like we do, they're in situations we're not in. because they are taking risks we don't tend to take. So there's two sides to the coin, and men could get on here and argue, well, hell, we were conditioned that we should just wild out here, and as a result, we catching cases, getting fired, or whatever else. You know what I mean? So
Right.
to me, this is more a presentation of being more holistic in being able to kind of sample what angles you should take when, whether you're a male or a female, because like it's not that the right thing to do is the right thing to do or going to give you the best outcomes every time. Because sometimes, to your point, especially thinking about your daddy, the attorney, right? We
Yeah.
don't be playing around and catch a case because we out here trying to quote unquote be new age feminist disruptors, where we're like, well, we're not following rules anymore because women, and then now we in jail, right? So
Right.
I think whether you follow the rules in the classic kind of a way or you show up fully like doubling down on like 100% compliance to what your classic definition of being a woman and what that means, right, is all about, or that you're shifting in other ways. I think it's hard. It is experimental, because there's so many factors that you need to assess to know in any one moment, is this the rule following moment, or is this the get a little edgy,
Right.
moment? Is this
Right.
where my classic, is this where I can leverage that as a woman I'm going to be seen as a better communicator, right? Because women don't like to talk. We stay showing up talking about how everything's unfair, but we're not really that excited to show up and talk about how we actually benefit from being women
Right.
at times. And that is a thing. A man would also get on here and be like, you think that you having the sensuality of women doesn't sometimes equate to a woman getting a job before a man. A woman say, well, I don't want to get the job for that. It doesn't matter if you want to. That comes into play, and we certainly have an advantage in that scenario, right? So like
Yeah.
it's so complex. And so this is why, our focus on in my work on emotional intelligence and learning how your own process, learning others, and being able to be situationally aware, like that would be my presentation, to say this is more an argument that we need to like challenge ourselves as women to be more situationally aware, to know when perhaps our traditional approach could actually harm us, right? Because you're asking about my success. That's what I'm doing. That's what I've been doing. I'm looking, I'm scanning, I'm sensing who's in the room. That's all the way from whether or not I'm dealing with boomers versus millennials versus X's, men versus women, corporate versus nonprofit, disruptor types versus traditional types, all and all the very nuanced realities, to know when I'm in any scenario, what decision do I make as far as how do I have the best chance to succeed at whatever it is I'm trying to pull off in that moment. If that even answers, like it's art. It's art. But my presentation to you would be that if you don't even know that these rules exist, if you don't even know that men are approaching this different, and by the way, while there are certainly men who are out here that are like literally thinking about how they can one up a woman, I would argue that in many cases it's absolute unconscious bias. Like they're
Yeah.
not necessarily thinking about the fact that we don't think like this. They just know that they operate that way. They're not,
Yeah.
it's not even on their radar that we don't. And then that therefore they're like, I don't even know how it is that I'm overcoming. It's the same with racism. Like white folks
Yeah.
don't necessarily realize that there's this whole reality going on. And so this is the whole where unconscious bias comes in. So that's why I try to stay out of
Yeah.
these us versus them type conversations, because there's a whole lot, while there's intentional stuff going on, there's a whole lot of unintentional stuff going on, which is still not acceptable. And while all of that is so damn complex, I'm just going to still ask myself today and every day, what can I do? What can I learn? How can I shift how I'm seeing and thinking about this so that I can get better results for myself today,
Yeah.
regardless, you know what I mean? Of like whether or not I'm at an organization that's quote unquote woke or feminist or, human centered or whatever. Because
Mhm.
for me, it's just not an option to not win. It's not an option for me to not reach my goals. And so I want to put all the control in my own hands of my destiny as possible. So I just can't be out here doing that much worrying about,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to find out, is there something I can learn, right? Is there an angle I can take? You know what I mean? Is there a way in which I can educate myself that's going to help me get to where I want to go sooner while all of this ridiculousness is still alive and well in 2023? Because for me, I'm in the business world, like, and I'm almost always in a room, either the only woman or close to it.
Mhm.
And or the only black woman, right? And so it's exhausting. Yes, it doesn't. So I don't think that like the presentation of like, let's opt into a game makes this shit any easier. If that's what you're
Mhm.
asking, it's still hard, but I feel like, well, if it's going to be hard either way, let me opt into the way of hard that allows me to
Mhm.
potentially get where I want to go rather than looking for a four-leaf clover, and like just hoping that I get lucky and these mugs treat me the way they should. If that makes sense, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I think those are all amazing points, amazing insight. I think, I just reflecting as you're talking, I have like a lot obviously going through my head. And, it's interesting too, coming from a helper background. And I think
Mhm.
when you
Another
look at
identity that makes this even harder.
it makes it harder. And it's, what's always been so like I always had this like feeling of just discomfort was in the different organizations that I have worked as a helper before I started working here at Joy Society. It was so it was like women dominate the helping professions. We know that.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
yet the top, if you look at any of these organizations, the
You
people
wanna
at
give
the
us some more
top,
depressing stats?
well, yeah, well, yeah. And so that to me was always like, well, it's a perfect picture of what we're discussing and how when I look back at my kind of experience in my early career as a helper, it was confusing to the point of I thought that, again, you get in the door and you just work hard and you'll end up in a higher role. And I think that it was, a wake up call, because if that were true, those roles would be women, because because I looked around and saw everyone around me was a woman working really hard and
Mhm.
being, the classic helper identity where it's like you just, you help the people, and how are those the people that are not rising up through the ranks? It's just kind of hits you in the face. And when you're in school, it's not so obvious because you're like, well, you're surrounded by women doing really well. We do great in school, we do great in college. And it's the world of work that has not changed in those ways, or does not,
Mhm.
change as quickly as we would like. So to your point, it's like, what can we do? What can we each do about it? And I think it is a reflection on what do you want out of your career, and
Mhm.
how do you get that? How do you not, get hung up on the frustrations and just give up? Because that is a risk we run, especially like you said, we burn ourselves out so quickly because of thinking that this is what's going to get us what we want, but it's not. We're not doing the things that get us what we want. We're
Yeah.
not playing the game.
Yeah.
That's the bottom
Yeah.
line.
And so as we wrap up, for those of you who are
Mhm.
like, well, I'm not playing a game. They should just be acting right. I feel you, and if for you at the end of the day, it's just something you feel like you can't make a shift, then you have the right to show up to yourself and to this life however you see fit. So I respect however folks need to show up. I will say though, hopefully we've conveyed that this is not about becoming unethical or immoral, right? This is about just being at minimal, just be aware, make ourselves more and more aware,
Yeah.
because you can never fully get it all, right? It's a lot, especially if you've gone your whole life like thinking that the world runs this way and that the workplace operates this way. It's really quite disruptive. And so I would just ask that you at least explore what others are doing, so that even if you don't change, you refuse to change the way you show up at all, that you're at least arming yourself with the insight of understanding that this other thing is happening and these other realities are at play, so that perhaps when it makes sense, you are empowered to potentially make a small shift that could make a big difference, right? And so that's what I hope we leave you all with. We could go on for 2 more hours, but hopefully, again, we just have presented something to encourage you all, while we again have to continue to advocate for better realities for women as it relates to the workplace and success, finance, all that good stuff. Let's combine those efforts with arming ourselves with a willingness, right, to get a little edgy, get a little disruptive, get a little self-disruptive, right, to see what can you do for yourself in the meantime. So we'll see you very soon. We're just kicking off Women's History Month, so stay tuned. It's going to be lit all month long.
We'll
Take
see
care.
you soon.